The UFC and Dana White are currently doing the biggest star in MMA history incredibly dirty. Conor McGregor has 2 fights left on his current contract, but is in the process of being iced by the promotion. We've been talking about McGregor's next fight for seemingly over a year at this point. We thought maybe he would return, sometime in the summer of 2023. Then we thought late 2023, now maybe early 2024. We're currently in March and we do not have a Conor McGregor fight booked. Conor has come out multiple times, spoken that he is ready to fight. He originally wanted to fight at UFC 300. Now he's calling to fight at International Fight Week, and then he also wants to turn it around to fight at the Sphere later on in the year against Nate Diaz. In February, we had Dana White go on the Pat McAfee show, and they asked him when we would see Conor McGregor return to the octagon, and his answer was that he will fight Chandler hopefully this year, hoping for the fall. So you have Conor McGregor, who actively wants to fight. He wants to fight within the first third of this year, if not, in the first half. And Dana saying maybe we'll get him in sometime in the fall. To me, that seems crazy. I'm sure that should be firing off some alarms in most fans' minds. Dana has also come out recently and completely shot the idea down of McGregor Diaz 3 taking place at the Sphere. Conor McGregor did an interview this week where he reiterated his desire to fight at International Fight Week and then turn around for the last fight on his contract, the second fight this year at the Sphere. And he also mentioned how he wasn't happy with the cold water that Dana White put on the Nate Diaz fight. He said his current relationship with the UFC, there's just no talk between the two. He says there needs to be discussion and conversation surrounding his next fight and when he's going to make his return. I think at this point, for anyone who's really paying attention, it is very clear the UFC does not want Conor McGregor to fight out his contract. I'm sure from McGregor's perspective, although he's not saying it out loud, which is good for the UFC, he's got to be eyeing the money that Saudi Arabia could be dishing out to him. If he's not under contract with the UFC, we're seeing Francis Ngannou go out and make $20 million. Conor McGregor could probably bag $100 million from Saudi Arabia just from a single fight, whether that's MMA or boxing. We know it isn't a new tactic from the UFC to really try to hold on to guys for as long as they can and, honestly send them out in a negative light into free agency. The UFC definitely does not like when their fighters leave on good terms, and they're very controlling and possessive when it comes to keeping their fighters, especially their big stars, under contract. We've seen it very recently with guys like Nate Diaz and Francis Ngannou, and we actually had Nate Diaz come out in support of Conor McGregor. So there was a graphic with a quote from Conor that said, "I was hoping for a December date, then a January date, then it keeps getting pushed back. Then I lose interest and stop training for a while. Not stop training, I'm always training, but stop full training and start drinking a little bit. So I'm going to go back, regroup, get full tested, and get ready to rock. The date's going to come, and I'll be ready to rock." So that was Conor McGregor. Nate Diaz responded to that graphic on Twitter. He said, "This was me for years before Conor even got here. They want you to die before you get out of these contracts. It's up to you to make something pop. No one's going to help you but you. Free Conor. It's St. Patty's Day in this bitch." So he tweeted that on St. Patrick's Day, kind of showing his support for Conor McGregor. Even though they've had 2 fights, these two do kind of go back and forth, showing each other respect. But I think both guys do currently want that third fight. In my opinion, this whole situation with Conor McGregor is something that should piss off the fans as well as other fighters. Conor has elevated this organization more than anyone else in the history of the UFC. He's also been consistently very positive. He has talked about some frustration with some of the inactivity we know over the pandemic. They're also kind of icing him because they wanted him with fans. So he's expressed some frustration, but for the most part, he has been very, very positive and complimentary when talking about the organization. If Conor McGregor, the biggest star, wants to fight out his contract that he signed, right? He agreed to this contract. He wants to fight it out. He does not want out of his contract. He wants to fight out his last 2. The UFC should allow him to do that. The fact that they would rather keep him on the sidelines and kind of trap him instead of giving him a fight is just embarrassing at this point. I do think this should be a slap in the face to the fans, other fighters, and, most importantly, Conor McGregor here. For the biggest stars, there are a lot of big money opportunities outside of the UFC. I just mentioned Ngannou and Diaz. Ngannou made a ton of money in both the Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua fights, more money in each of those than he would have made even in the biggest fight possible against John Jones. You also had Nate Diaz, and even though he did not beat Jake Paul in the boxing match. You have to imagine he made a ton of money going up against Jake Paul, and now he's going to be boxing Jorge Masvidal. I understand a lot of fans want to see these big stars stay within the UFC. They want them to be fighting the best people, right? Everyone wanted to see Nate Diaz against like a Dustin Poirier, a Conor McGregor for the third time. They wanted to see Francis Ngannou going up against John Jones. But personally, I'm always going to be in support of these guys going out, hitting the open market, and making what they're truly worth. Because as we're finding out with guys like Francis Ngannou, Nate Diaz, a lot of these guys are not making what they truly, should earn if they were to hit the open market. And Conor's the same way. He might be the highest paid fighter in UFC history, but if he goes somewhere else, he's almost guaranteed to make a heck of a lot more than he does with the UFC. So I hope we see Conor get 2 fights this year, and then whether he re-signs with the UFC or books a fight somewhere else, I know everyone's going to be watching. So how are you guys feeling about this situation? I think it's crazy that this is viewed as almost like a common practice from the UFC. It's crazy. I don't know why more fighters, aren't speaking up against it, why the fans are not rallying around fighters in this situation. The UFC's always talking, we make the fights the fans want to see. Well, I'm sure the fans would like to see Conor McGregor fight, whether that's against Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, Nate Diaz, and the UFC is certainly not making that happen. So we'll see how this plays out. Hopefully Conor gets a fight booked, and like I said, he either fights out his contract, goes somewhere else, or re-ups with the UFC. But all I will say is that if the UFC is not bringing Nate Diaz back, and Conor McGregor wants to get that trilogy, if he can get out of his contract with the UFC, fight it out, that fight is going to make those two a ton of money because you're not going to have the UFC taking 80% of the revenue. But that's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. I will see you all in the next one.